National Committee. Less than 2 years ago, Arvin and John J. Myers of Texas took over the National Party Facebook page, which at the time had been trundling along, I guess, about 40,000 likes or whatever. Now it's at least 480,000, I believe, 3/4 of the way to the Democratic They have great graphics, hard-hitting, bold, solid libertarian themes, and is getting a tremendous amount of traffic. It is my contention that no one advanced the cause of the Libertarian Party more in 2013 than Arvin Vohra. Arvin has his own business, Arvin Vohra Education, which has been around since 2001. He is the author of 2 books on education. He is 2 degrees from Brown, and he's here to tell us about libertarian social media. Please welcome Arvin Vohra.
Thanks very much, Chairman Bob. For decades, the media has done its best to sideline and ignore the Libertarian Party, and to ignore other candidates that have a similar message to the Libertarian Party, Ron Paul being the classic example. Why they do that might be some kind of crony capitalism. It might be just a fear that a threat to any part of the status quo is in some way a threat to every part of the status quo. But whatever the reasons behind it, they've forgotten something. They forgot that we're libertarians. A lot of us are entrepreneurs. Some of us are small business owners. We're individualists. If we don't like any of the restaurants in an area, or just think we can do better, we'll probably start our own restaurant. When we didn't like any of the political parties available, we started our own political party. And when the media ignores us, we make our own media. A couple years ago, when I first got on the LNC, John J. Myers and I had an unusual proposal. We wanted the Facebook page to be not just a place where we posted official press releases once a week. We wanted to use that potential weapon as a powerful, actual weapon. We wanted to use that Facebook page as aggressively and as assertively as we possibly could. So with the support of the LNC and of the staff, Carla Howell, the political director, a lot of support from Michael Cloud, we embarked on an experiment. What could we do? If we just took all the reins off, what could we do? In our initial phase, what we basically did is this. We started using just the basic ideas of social media, and we started taking material that was already circulating around Facebook. We just started posting some of that. We'd add our comments, encourage people to join. We were basically using what was already out there. It's important to understand the difference between traditional media and social media when we're really thinking about how the libertarian media works. With traditional media, if you want 1 million people to see something, you basically have to buy a very expensive television commercial. With social media, if you want 1 million people to see something, you need to post something that people will voluntarily share with their friends, and then their friends will voluntarily share with their friends, etc., etc. The thing that you share can be a graphic, it can be a short sentence, in theory it can be a long essay. It can be really anything that's going to get people to voluntarily share it. Now because of that, we get instant feedback about what works and what doesn't. There's no 6-month waiting period, it's more of a 6-second waiting period. Soon we realized that we wanted to take it to a different level. Right now we're just using material and images that were already out there, but we wanted to make our own images. We wanted to make partisan content. We wanted to make not just libertarian-leaning messages, but we wanted to talk about the Libertarian Party. We wanted to talk about libertarian candidates. And although John Jay and I knew quite a bit about liberty, and although we knew a little bit about writing, neither of us knew anything about graphic design. We wanted to put out a lot of content. So it would have been astronomically expensive for us to just hire enough designers to actually do that. So we decided to put together graphic design teams. The first version of the team didn't really work. Second version kind of worked and stopped working. We went through many, 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 many different iterations. But within a few months, we actually had a working design team. And what this design team was hundreds of designers from around the country, along with people who were writing content and designing the actual messaging. So kind of like the traditional model of a copywriter working with an ad director, we had now several copywriters and several hundred ad directors, several hundred designers contributing to this process. The methods worked so well for us that we then started branching out into other areas. We had, and we still have for that matter, a page that has people working together who select this content. That's what John Jay and I were originally doing. Now there's 30 or 40 people who do that. We had pages for people who work together to respond to the incoming messages. We had pages for writers, and some of the pages worked brilliantly, some didn't work so well. Many have gone through many, many, many repetitions and revisions and complete just redrafts from scratch. When John J. Myers left the LNC, he left some very, very big shoes to fill. But the nice thing is by that time we had a lot of feet to fill those shoes. And that's really what social media is about. It's a lot of feet instead of one large monolith. There's a lot of people working together. When we think about libertarian social media and the libertarian media, we're not just talking about the people who run the Facebook page. We're also talking about anybody who shares any of the content on the Facebook page. We're talking about anybody who comments on the content on the Facebook page. We're talking about the people who take these ideas and don't just present them online, but argue them offline. Who don't just present them on our Facebook page, but put them on the comment section, WashingtonPost.com or CNN.com, NewYorkTimes.com. We're talking about a large number of people all over the country working together voluntarily to create what essentially we did not really have before. We didn't really have anything like this before. It's around the clock. We've had 4 a.m. posts that have gotten over 1 million views. It's everywhere and always. Our stuff has surfaced in not just around America, but in other countries. Now, social media has given us a much more powerful voice. It's given the libertarian media a much more powerful voice than we had before. And because of the skills of our designers, it's given us a much more beautiful and pleasing voice. But the beauty and power of a voice is not the most important thing. The most important thing is what that voice is saying. What is the content of the voice? If you think about Coke's marketing department, Coke's marketing department's job is not to get people to like Coke. It's not to get people to think that Coke is cool. It's not to get people to believe that Coke is refreshing and delicious. Their job is only to get people to buy Coke. The libertarian media, we have a very specific job. And when I said libertarian media, I don't just mean everybody who's working on Facebook or on Twitter or Pinterest or LinkedIn. I mean anybody who's ever shared a libertarian idea with anybody. That's what the libertarian media is. It's everybody in this room. It's everybody to some extent who's in the Libertarian Party. If you're in the Libertarian Party and you've ever told anybody about it, that includes you. And the job of the libertarian media is not to get people to think that liberty is cool. It's not to get people to see the Libertarian Party as something that they identify with. It's not really our job to make people think that the Libertarian Party is edgy and cool, or down-to-earth and friendly, or conservative and respectable. In fact, it's not even really to get people to vote libertarian. The job of the libertarian media is to cut government and advance liberty. It's to cut government and advance education. It's to cut government and grow the economy. That's what the job is of the libertarian media. If I were a big government, big spending nanny statist, if my entire goal in life were to get tax money and funnel it to my cronies, to use that money to interfere with your lives, with your property, with your privacy, and I wanted to be able to do this, I might actually take a page out of America's far past, out of our rustic past. If you've ever seen a Western, you know that in America's more rustic past, when a baby was about to be born, when a woman was about to give birth, all the men in the room would be sent to boil water for cleaning or for making warm compresses, or at least that was the theory. But it was also a very convenient way to get all the men out of the room. If my goal was to get all the libertarians out of the way, to get them out of the room, so I could do my big government, crony capitalist, nanny stating, if I could use that, if I could get them out of the way so I could invade privacy, I'd probably want to do something similar. I'd want to get them out of the room doing something else. Here's what I would have them do. I would have them do two things. The first is, I would have them argue about ideas with no immediacy, and then I would try to have them argue about labels that had no impact. I would get them to debate with each other about which of two very distant utopias was the best. I would get them to argue the relative merits of being an anarcho-consequentialist or a theo-minarchist. Here's what would terrify me. If my goal was crony capitalism, intrusion in your privacy, if that was my goal, here's what would terrify me. I would be terrified if the libertarians started talking about specific actions. I would be terrified if they started getting other people to demand those actions. Because here's the thing. You can say, I'm fiscally conservative, and then find some facile excuse to funnel more money into the Department of Education. George W. Bush already did that with No Child Left Behind. You can say, hey, I'm socially liberal. You can talk openly and honestly about your own experiences with drugs, with marijuana, with cocaine, and then still find some excuse to increase the war on drugs, to increase federal raids on state-licensed medical marijuana dispensaries. Barack Obama has already done that. But what you can't do is you can't, having promised people that, yes, I will do my best to end the Department of Education, then increase the budget of the Department of Education, or having promised that, yes, I will end the war on drugs because that's what the voters demanded. You can't do that and then increase the war on drugs without looking completely ridiculous. I mean, there are limits even to political doublespeak. At that point, you would have made yourself a laughingstock. That right now is our challenge. That's our challenge on social media. I think that's our challenge as a party as a whole, but it's really definitely our challenge on social media, and we've gotten a lot better at it. There are some days where everything that comes out of our huge volunteer design teams is about cutting government and advancing liberty, or cutting government and improving food quality, or cutting government and improving education. And some days it's not. You know, we're not perfect. We're in the beginning stages of this process. But the really good news is this. We have now two powerful tools to make that happen. And these are relatively recent tools that we started to apply to our social media program. The first one, Carla Howell's Who's Driving training game. This training game is the most effective hour and a half I have spent in anything libertarian related in my life. Chairman Bob has gone through this training game. I've gone through it. Most of the LNC has gone through it. I know that many of you in this room have gone through this training game. This training game allows us to go from being a big libertarian media to being an effective libertarian media. To go from playing within somebody else's paradigm to creating our own paradigm. The new version of Google Hangouts allows up to 10 people to do live video conferencing at the same time. It also allows more people to watch that video conference. And what this means for us, because the original problem we had is that we had our volunteers all over the country. What this means for us now is that those volunteers from all over the country can now participate in Who's Driving training. We've done 2 sessions so far. We're about to do another one this Monday at 8 p.m. That training is something that I believe that every single candidate for office should go through. I think that every key player in the libertarian media should go through that. Every single Facebook volunteer. I think every state chair and every county chair should go through it. And I think that anybody who has any intention of discussing libertarian ideas with anybody ever should go through this training. And because of Google Hangouts, it's now going to be very convenient for essentially the entire party to, over the next period of months, go through this training. The change in effectiveness of something like this, if you combine the power of social media with the message control that you learn in something like Who's Driving, the results are essentially endless. I mean, combining the two is really what allows us to actually cut government and advance liberty, or cut government and advance prosperity. The second tool that we have is something that we borrowed right out of Grover Norquist's book. As you know, that Grover Norquist has his famous no tax pledge, no tax increase pledges. Many Republicans have signed on and they've pledged that they're never going to raise taxes. But we've just taken that thing and we've just moved it up a little bit. We now have a series of 5 pledges. A few dozen candidates have signed, some or all of them. And instead of just talking about holding the status quo, these are pledges about active and specific cuts. These include pledges about ending the war on drugs. They include pledges about cutting military spending, including pledges about cutting federal spending to 1992 levels and abolishing the income tax. These pledges allow us to then literally quote any candidate. Remember, our graphic design teams are not really beholden to any one person. We don't pay them, they're volunteers, and they can design whatever they want. In fact, they're modeled off after the Ron Paul Revolution. And because they're independent, now if a candidate has ever pledged to do something, our design teams can now create 500 graphics for that candidate showing that he pledged to do something. And if that candidate decides that he also wants to talk about something else, if it's something that inspires people, he'll get more images. If it's something that is not terribly powerful, it won't have that result. So it really allows us to encourage people to get specific, action-oriented, to do the actions that literally cut government and improve our day-to-day lives. 4 years ago, in this room, I asked for your nomination for House of Delegates in Maryland. And you had the faith in me to give me that nomination. During my speech on that day, I indicated that the government had grown this large, intrusive, and counterproductive over a period of decades. And I therefore argued that because of that, it would also take a period of decades for us to reverse that problem, to reverse that process, to cut the government down back to its appropriate size. Now, as somebody that's prepared a lot of people for the LSAT, I'm a little bit embarrassed that I made that particular logical fallacy. It might take 2 hours to build a sandcastle. It takes 5 seconds to knock it down. It might take a year to build a house, 15 minutes to bulldoze it. Yeah, it's taken the Department of Education, for example, a few decades to become as large, expensive, problematic, counterproductive, and intrusive as it is now. But that doesn't mean it's going to take decades to reverse the process. To reverse the process is simple. We just need to fire everybody and put the building on the market. For the TSA, we just need to fire everybody and sell the building. Department of Homeland Security, NSA, fire everyone, put the building on the market. DEA, fire everyone, put the building on the market. It's not a process that it inherently needs to take as long to knock something down as it does to build it up. A cancerous growth might take years to develop. It's not like we take years to gradually cut it out. Military. We need to cut the military spending. I think we need to cut it by 60% or more. If we cut military spending by 60%, we will still outspend Russia and China combined. Now, if we cut military spending, we will need less military personnel. I say that the people who represent the heroism, hard work, and discipline that military men and women are supposed to represent, let's have them do something better with those talents, something more useful than interfering with other nations, creating enemies. Let's have them beat those proverbial swords into plowshares and help lead an era of prosperity, innovation, and excellence. I think it's definitely time that we stop squandering our best and our brightest on counterproductive military pursuits. The libertarian media has two important jobs. The first job is to very clearly define what a libertarian is. Here's why that job is important. Because there's a threat coming. And that's not a type of threat that's going to come from the front. It's not like Obamacare, the Patriot Act, No Child Left Behind. It's not another war. It's not something that's going to come at us in the way that these threats usually come. It's not a Wall Street bailout. This is the type of threat that comes from behind. This is an insidious threat. It comes from the people who are going to want to use the rhetoric of liberty without any of the actions of liberty. Use libertarian words and quotes and engage in or encourage anti-libertarian actions. So the first thing that we need to do is clearly define what a libertarian is and make sure everybody in this country knows that a libertarian is not just someone who's fiscally conservative and socially liberal. It's not just someone who believes in small government. A libertarian is somebody who cuts government and advances liberty, who cuts government and advances education, who cuts government and increases jobs. That's what a libertarian is. And that definition needs to be made redundant and so clear that everybody knows it, and that when anybody tries to define libertarian as anything else, it doesn't work. But we as the libertarian media, we have a second job, and that is to ask questions, to ask the right questions. We have to ask these questions of anybody who's asking for our support, who's running for office, who's seeking our nomination, who's asking for any kind of direct or indirect support in any way whatsoever. And when we really think about what those questions are, it really comes down to one question. And there's just one question we need to ask. And we need to ask that question on our Facebook page and on their Facebook pages. If there's an article about them in the comments section on WashingtonPost.com and NewYorkTimes.com, if it's a candidate forum, live in the candidate forum or in the candidate debate. If one of their supporters is talking to you, ask it of the supporter. And the only question that we need to ask is, what will you cut? If you're running for a legislative position, what cuts will you sponsor as legislation? That's if you're running for Congress, House of Delegates, Senate. If you're running for an executive position, what cuts will you sign into law? Now, if they're paying lip service to us and saying, well, I really believe in, okay, great, but what will you cut? If they then respond with some poetic quote about liberty, we say, okay, I agree with that quote, but what will you cut? If they say, well, I'm a small L libertarian because, fine, but what will you cut? And if they say, I'm a big L libertarian, so anything I do is automatically great, okay, fine, but what will you cut? Rand Paul has already shown us what kind of character he has and what kind of principles he has. Rand Paul showed the entire world what kind of man he was when he endorsed Mitt Romney for president. Ron Paul showed the world what kind of man he is when he refused to. I believe that people can change. If I didn't believe that people could improve, probably wouldn't be an educator. But I also believe that in order to get people to change, sometimes you need to put a humongous, massive, and relentless amount of external pressure to make it happen. If I didn't believe that, I probably wouldn't be a very good educator. We need to make it absolutely clear to Rand Paul and future Rand Pauls, to libertarian candidates, future libertarian candidates, to Gary Johnson and future Gary Johnsons, that the only way to get any libertarian support at all is to cut government and advance liberty, to cut government and improve education, to cut government and improve the economy. There should be no other way. It doesn't matter how deeply you claim to believe something. Anybody can say that. Cutting government, advancing liberty. A few centuries ago, military battles began very politely at sunrise and then ended promptly at sunset. And not long ago, political battles were kind of similar. They happened at a specific time, and they happened at a specific place. And that was the limit of public political discourse. Of course, there's private political discourse, but as far as public political debate, that was the limit of it. Of course, in this polite and formal political debate, libertarians were politely and formally excluded. Now we're living in a different situation. The public political battle is not confined to any time or any place. It is everywhere, always. It is on Facebook, it is on Twitter, it is on the comment section of newspapers. It is 24/7. We're actually well prepared for that type of war. We're ready for that. We have the numbers. Lord knows we have the technical know-how. I mean, in any room of libertarians, we're going to get at least a few computer engineers. Despite the prejudices to the contrary, we also have the organization. Thanks to who's driving, we'll soon have the right messaging focus. As more and more of the so-called armchair libertarians gravitate and become more desk chair libertarians and engage in these public political debates around the clock, we're going to start to see two things happen. One is responses to laws are going to change. When a cut is being proposed, people are going to get more excited. And that's just the first step to then people demanding the cuts and then people getting those cuts. Eventually, we're going to see enough cuts to create a significant improvement in people's lives. And at that point, we really have a kind of a domino effect. I'd like to close today by answering my own question. I mean, it's true that I have certain ideas about Facebook and Twitter, but the real question is, what will I cut? Many of you guys know I'm running for Congress in the 4th District. If any of you guys have recording devices, this might be a good time to have them on. And just give you a bit of social media strategy. If I say these pledges and then am elected and then don't follow through on any of them, all you need to do is take this video or this sound and juxtapose it against the actions and have it put on repeat a couple times on YouTube and then share that all over Facebook. And I guarantee you that if I don't follow through, I will never have another chance at politics ever again forever. So what will I cut? I have it written down. I wanted to make sure I didn't forget a single piece of it. Number one, if I'm elected, I will sponsor legislation to cut federal spending to 1992 levels or below and thereby abolish the income tax, the federal income tax. If I'm elected, I will sponsor legislation to cut military spending by at least 60% and reduce taxes accordingly. And if by that time we've already eliminated the income tax, reduce debt accordingly. I will sponsor legislation to end the war on drugs, to completely eliminate the DEA, and to release all nonviolent drug offenders from prison. That will make our streets safer. It'll build real personal responsibility. It will stop destroying the lives of people for absolutely no reason. It'll bring greater safety, less money spent, more security. I will work to abolish the Department of Education. I want to really illustrate why the Department of Education is problematic. Not just at the federal level, but even at the state level. Now, running for Congress, I can only pledge to abolish the Federal Department of Education, and I will. And just in case there's any potential of misunderstanding what I mean, that does include the entire federal financial aid student loan and student grant program. With the elimination of that program, universities will have no choice but to either lower their tuition to something reasonable or go out of business for good. I want to say a couple words, though, about state departments of education. And I have one more over here. I have one more over here of my pledges. But I want to say a word about the State Department of Education while we're on the topic of education. We've talked so much about downsizing agencies and firing government workers. Now the question is, what happens then? What happens then? And what happens then is, as Carla Howell has shown, every government worker that's fired, the private sector creates 2 new jobs. The question is, why does that happen? Well, some of it's more disposable income available, but a big part of it is because a lot of these agencies' sole reason for existence is to pass and enforce regulations that just don't make any kind of sense to anybody, that get in the way of progress. Right now, we are in a state in which, before 2007, when he got an honorary bachelor's degree, Bill Gates would not have been allowed to teach a computer science class in a private school. We're in a state right now where if you're homeschooling your child, you hire 5 college professors to teach that child one-on-one, and you hire the president of Harvard University to oversee the program. If you did that, you would be breaking the law. When we fire people, when we shut down agencies that do that, whose sole reason for existence is to interfere with progress that way, the result is better education, more innovation, and more jobs. So when I say I want to abolish the Department of Education at the federal level and at the state level, although I'm not running for state position, I will support anybody in any way I can to make sure that that happens. I'm not saying I'm opposed to education. I'm all about education. And the real way to help education, to make it better, cheaper, more individualized, more quality, to give children the kind of world-class education that they deserve to compete in a global economy, the way to do that is to abolish the Federal Department of Education and the State Department of Education. My final pledge. If elected, I will sponsor legislation to repeal the Patriot Act, to end all NSA warrantless domestic spying, and to work to massively downsize our current 17 separate spy agencies into one very much tinier spy agency that actually follows the Constitution and remains accountable to the American people. Our social media program right now is barely in the alpha stage. We're barely starting what we're going to be doing. It's just beginning. we're not beta testing at this point. We're still building that prototype. We're really just at the beginning. And in the same way, in terms of cutting government, if I'm elected, those pledges will be just the beginning of the cuts in government and the increases in liberty, prosperity, and quality of life that I'll be making. Thank you.